When I retired last spring, I pictured quiet mornings, tinkering with old radios, and spending time with my grandkids. But retirement hit harder than expected. The stillness of the house felt too quiet. The days stretched too long. That's when my daughter Melissa visited and made a casual suggestion that would spiral into the most bizarre chapter of my life. "Dad," she said, pulling down an old box from my garage shelf, "you've got treasure in these boxes. Why don't you sell some of it online?" She was right. Decades of my life were packed vintage radios from the 50s, collectible model trains, stacks of baseball cards. I'd collected for years, preserving every item with care. It felt good to open those boxes again, nostalgic, purposeful. I started slowly, posted a couple of listings online. When that first vintage Zenith radio sold to a collector in Texas, I felt like I had made a friend. My simple garage morphed into a cozy workspace, a folding table, some shipping tape, bubble wrap, boxes, and a notebook where I tracked every item I sent out. I wasn't turning a profit. I wasn't even trying. It was never about the money. Soon, the rhythm settled in. Photograph, post, ship, repeat. I called it my retirement project. It kept my mind sharp and my heart warm. Until that Tuesday afternoon, when everything changed. I was taping up a small box when a sharp knock rang through the garage door. I opened it, expecting a delivery, but found Karen Thompson instead. She stood stiffly with a clipboard tucked under her arm, wearing that signature frown she reserved for trash cans placed 2 inches off alignment. "Mr. Davis," she said, skipping any pleasantries, "several neighbors have expressed concern about your operation." "Operation?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded toward the table. "Shipping activity, boxers, frequent pickups. Our HOA bylaws prohibit running businesses from home." I chuckled. "It's not a business, Karen. I'm retired. I'm just selling off my personal collection. Want to see this 1950s radio? It's going to a collector in Houston." Karen's eyes narrowed. Without responding, she pulled out her phone and began snapping photos of the interior of my garage. "This will go to the committee for review. Your garage looks like a warehouse. We've had increased delivery traffic on this street." I tried to reason with her. "Karen, I've lived here for 15 years. You've eaten burgers at my 4th of July cookouts. This is just keeping me busy in retirement. I'm not disturbing anyone." "Rules are rules," she snapped, walking away without another word. 3 days later, a violation notice from the HOA was taped to my front door. The letter, printed in bold and legalese, accused me of operating an unauthorized postal facility. From my home, according to their interpretation of Section 8, Paragraph 3, my garage had been transformed into a commercial-grade distribution center, incompatible with residential zoning. I laughed at first, then I reread it. The HOA gave me 72 hours to cease all shipping activities or face daily fines of $100. I called Richard Fletcher, the HOA president, hoping for some logic. "Richard," I said, "this is absurd. Just selling a few things online. These are my own belongings. I'm not importing goods from China or running FedEx from my garage." Richard sounded tired. "Look, Jim, I know this sounds ridiculous, but Karen's documented over 30 package pickups in the last month. She's got photos, logs, she even cited tracking numbers." I sighed. "So what's the cutoff?" 29 packages is okay, but 30 is illegal. The board voted on it," he said reluctantly. "I can't override their decision alone." Of course not. Karen had moved in 5 years ago and turned HOA board politics into her personal empire. She patrolled the streets with a ruler for measuring grass height and took photos of trash cans, left out 10 minutes past collection time. That night, I spotted her peeking out of her living room window, sipping from a coffee mug while watching my garage. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she raised her cup in a mocking toast. Later, my neighbor Ted stopped by, heard about the post office, he joked. "Karen's showing your garage photos at book club." I chuckled, then frowned. "I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not bothering anyone." Ted shrugged. "She says your packages attract thieves. Claims her Ring camera caught someone scoping houses after a delivery." I shook my head. "That's paranoid nonsense. She's persuasive," he warned. "People are nervous." I emailed the entire HOA board that night with photos of my setup and an explanation. Only Richard replied, "The decision stands. compliance expected within 48 hours. The next morning, Diane from across the street waved me over. "Jim, I support you," she whispered, "but be careful. Last year, I painted my front door navy instead of ocean blue. Karen filed daily complaints until I repainted. Cost me $300. This is different," I insisted. "I'm not violating the rules." "Reason doesn't matter to her," Diane said quietly. "She's here to win." And I realized then this wasn't about bylaws. It was about control. That Saturday, I attended the emergency HOA meeting held at the community center. The room was packed, neighbors filled folding chairs and lined the back wall. Many cast glances in my directions, some sympathetic, others cautious. Karen stood at the front with a slideshow presentation titled, "Commercial Encroachment Threatening Our Community Values." She clicked through photos of my garage, zoomed in on shipping labels, circled boxes in red, and presented a graph showing a so-called increase in delivery truck traffic. She even claimed without evidence that property values had dropped by 3% because of my business. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice steady. "I'm selling my own belongings as a retirement hobby. I'm not running a business. I've lived here peacefully for 15 years. Karen interrupted, quoting from the bylaws. Section 8, Paragraph 3, prohibits commercial use of residential property. That applies to actual businesses, I said. I'm not advertising a service. I'm not operating a storefront. I'm just mailing old items to people who value them. The debate went back and forth. Some neighbors nodded at my points. Others looked uneasy. Karen's fear-mongering had taken root. The final vote, 5-2, they upheld the violation. As people filtered out, a few offered quiet apologies. Others avoided eye contact. Outside, I saw Karen and Richard laughing by their cars. Something inside me snapped. I had played by the rules all my life, served in the military, worked at the same company for 40 years, never missed a mortgage payment. I didn't deserve this that night. I tossed and turned. Then, at 5 a.m., with a steaming mug of coffee in hand, I sat down at my computer. If they wanted to say my garage was commercial, I'd show them what a real commercial event looked like. I took photos of everything in the garage: vintage radios, model trains, old tools, Christmas lights, mismatched chairs, board games, and even an old lava lamp. I posted them all 30 listings each on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Nextdoor. Each one read, "Free pickup, only cleanout ordered by Pinecrest Gardens, HOA. Everything must go this Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. No early birds, no holds." Then, I created a Facebook event. Court-ordered HOA community giveaway greater than due to a recent HOA ruling. I've been required to remove items from my garage. As a result, all contents are being offered to the public for free. This event is approved by the Pinecrest Gardens HOA. I shared the event in every local garage sale group I could find. Hundreds clicked interested. I woke up early and arranged everything in the driveway like a showroom. Radios were front and center, tools in labeled bins. A large banner hung from the garage door. Neighborhood collection event, free items, courtesy of Pine Crest Gardens HOA by 7:15. A young couple pulled up. "Are you open yet?" they asked. "Come on over," I said. "Special early access." By 7:45, 5 more cars arrived. By 8 o'clock, cars lined both sides of the street. By 8:30, people were parking 2 blocks away and walking in. The radios were the first to go, then the tools. Strangers smiled, thanked me, asked why everything was free. I replied calmly. The HOA said I couldn't use my garage for personal shipping anymore, so I'm clearing it out, just like they wanted. At 9 a.m., Karen's front door flew open. She stood frozen, staring at the crowd. By 9:30, our quiet street looked like a street fair. Kids ran around with toys. Someone brought donuts. A local band set up nearby. Karen marched across the street, furious. "What do you think you're doing?" "Just following HOA directives," I said. "Garage contents needed to be cleared, so I am." She sputtered. "This is a public nuisance." "Is giving away my property against HOA rules, too?" Richard arrived soon after, looking panicked. "Jim, you have to stop this." "Why?" I asked. "I'm not selling anything. No shipping. Just complying." A news van pulled up. A reporter. stepped out.
Jim's palms were dry, but his heart pounded like he was storming a beach again. The HOA emergency meeting had been called on short notice, and the turnout was unusually high. Folding chairs filled the community center room, the kind used for potlucks and bake sales only tonight. It was a courtroom in disguise. Karen Thompson stood at the front in a lavender pantsuit that looked like it had been pressed by fury itself. She wore a smug expression and held a remote for the projector. As the slideshow began, Jim noticed her first slide was a blurry photo of his garage door cracked open, revealing his shipping table and a few open bins. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, "this is what we're dealing with: a full-blown commercial shipping operation. Pallets of boxers, cardboard waste, UPS trucks idling for pickups." Jim's jaw tightened. There had never been pallets. And the UPS truck came once a week. It was hardly Amazon. She clicked to another slide, graphs, presumably made on Excel, showing the supposed increase in delivery trucks on their street. "Statistically, we've seen a 43% uptick in package traffic on Juniper Lane alone." Murmurs rippled through the room. Ted, a neighbor Jim liked, leaned over and whispered, "I've got 3 teenage daughters. We are the package traffic." Jim cleared his throat and stood. "May I respond?" Karen paused dramatically, then waved a hand like a dismissive judge. "You have 3 minutes." Jim's voice was steady. "What I do in my garage is a hobby. I sell collectibles online. No customers visit. No signs. I don't use commercial delivery, just USPS like everyone else." He paused. "This is not about zoning. This is about one person who doesn't like seeing cardboard." Karen smirked. "It's about preserving our property values." Richard Fletcher, the HOA president, finally spoke. "Let's vote." In favor of upholding the violation notice, hands went up. Karen's, naturally, and for others, only to dissented Richard's side. The violation stands. Back home, Jim sat on the edge of his garage floor, the door open to the night. He watched the streetlights flicker. He wasn't angry anymore. He was coldly aware. This wasn't about fairness, it was about control. Karen had decided he was an eyesore, and the HOA had bent to her will. He opened a box labeled Ho-Scale Trains, rare, and ran his hand over the engine. 40 years of collecting. He'd never married, never had kids. These items were part of his identity. That's when an idea hit him. Karen wanted the items gone. Fine, he'd get rid of them, but not the way she expected. He spent the next morning cataloging his entire garage, photographing, listing, and writing cheeky descriptions like genuine 1980s walkie-talkies, Karen poof, and box of baseball cards guaranteed to upset your HOA. Then he made it public. He posted to Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, OfferUp, even the local Buy Nothing group. Free, massive HOA ordered cleanout. First come, first served. Everything must go. Sponsored by your friendly neighborhood association. Hours. The posts were shared dozens of times. He upped the ante. Jim created a Facebook event titled HOA Court-Ordered Cleanout and Community Giveaway. He used a smiling stock photo of suburban families holding boxes, and added fake endorsements, decluttering for a cleaner, Karen-free future. And come pick from a treasure trove of vintage items by community demand. He scheduled it for Saturday at 9 a.m. and included parking instructions. Then he printed flyers and quietly slid them into neighborhood mailboxes under the cover of dusk. He even texted Ted, "Get ready for a show. Bring coffee." Ted replied, "Should I bring lawn chairs?" Jim answered, "Better bring a camera." By Friday night, over 250 people had clicked going. The post had made it into several Facebook groups with captions like, "Wild garage cleanout this Saturday. Looks like HOA drama. Gonna be juicy." Jim slept better that night than he had in weeks. Saturday morning came with perfect blue skies. Jim rolled open the garage door and set up a long folding table. He laid out model trains, radios, a lava lamp, even a vintage Atari. At exactly 9:03 a.m., the first car pulled up, a young couple with a toddler and a dog. Then came another, and another. Soon, the cul-de-sac was packed. "Is this the HOA giveaway?" a woman asked. "Sure is," Jim said with a grin. "Help yourself." HOA said it all had to go. He even wore a name tag: Jim Resident, Collector, Lawful Complier. People laughed, grabbed items, and snapped photos. Jim noticed many were taking selfies with the sign he'd posted: "Welcome to Karen's court-ordered community cleanout." Karen appeared at 10:15, arms crossed, mouth tight. She stomped up his driveway, red-faced. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Complying," Jim replied. "I was told these items violate HOA guidelines, so I'm removing them, publicly, efficiently." "You said HOA ordered this." "I did." "You voted to enforce a violation." "I interpreted it creatively." She turned to see dozens of people laughing, recording, and happily shopping. Someone shouted, "Hey, thanks Karen, I got a jukebox." Karen stormed off, shouting into her phone. By noon, over 400 people had come through. Cars lined the street for blocks. Children played with old toys. Teenagers bought 90s electronics to resell. One couple hauled off a vintage couch. News traveled fast. A local journalist showed up, tipped off by a viral tweet. Guy hosts HOA forced garage sale to spite Karen. Legend, Jim offered interviews from a lawn chair. The HOA wanted it gone. He said on camera, "I'm just being neighborly." The journalist chuckled. "And what would you say to the HOA?" Jim held up a label maker and grinned. "Maybe next time. Ask nicely." Karen stood across the street, visibly fuming, shouting at Richard, who had finally arrived. His tie askew and sweat visible. Richard marched up the driveway. "Jim," he said, teeth clenched. "We need to talk." "Sure thing," Jim replied, gesturing to the crowd. "Let's take it public." Richard looked around and realized he was trapped. Cameras, laughter. Support for Jim was overwhelming. The HOA had made him a villain, but now they'd created something far worse. A folk hero.
Jim Reynolds had worked 37 years in aerospace engineering, designing turbine systems and managing high-pressure teams. When he retired at 67, he finally had time for peace and personal passions. His wife had passed several years earlier, and his 2 daughters lived in different states. So Jim moved to a quiet, sunny neighborhood called Willow Bend to enjoy his golden years in a tidy, single-story home with a wide driveway and a clean, organized garage. Inside that garage sat decades of his life's passions: vintage radios, collectible license plates, train sets, baseball cards, and antique tools. Some were museum-worthy, others were just sentimental relics of simpler times. Jim began selling off pieces on eBay not to make money, but to downsize and share his collection with others who would appreciate it. He packed the items in boxes, printed shipping labels on a small desk beside the workbench, and drove them to the post office twice a week. Neighbors occasionally stopped by to admire the treasures, and some even bought items directly from him. It wasn't a business, it was a peaceful routine. Part of the joy of retirement. But peace, as Jim would soon learn, was a fragile thing in Willow Bend, especially with an HOA itching for control. 3 months after Jim settled in, Karen Thompson appeared at his door. Karen, mid-50s and stiff as a coat rack, wore a wide-brimmed hat and clutched a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. She was a member of the HOA board, something she managed to mention within her first 5 words. "We've had a few concerns about the volume of packages going in and out of your garage," she said with a forced smile. "It appears you may be operating a business, which is a violation of HOA bylaw 8.6, commercial activity from a residential property." Jim, caught off guard, chuckled politely. "Oh, I'm not running a business, ma'am. Just selling a few old collectibles here and there." Karen's smile never wavered. "Regardless, several neighbors are uncomfortable. They say there's a lot of foot traffic and potential safety issues." Jim scanned the street. It was dead quiet. A dog barked 2 houses down. "I see," he said, trying to remain cordial. "Well, if you'd like to take a look, I'd be happy to show you my garage." She declined, citing policy, then handed him a printed warning. He was given 72 hours to cease all business activities or face daily fines of $100. Jim didn't take it personally at first. Surely it was just a misunderstanding. He sent a polite email to the HOA president, Richard Fletcher, explaining that he was just downsizing personal items, not running any sort of enterprise. But Richard replied 2 days later with a short, formal message. "While I understand your intent, the board has determined that the level of shipping activity constitutes a violation. Please comply with the notice sent to you." Jim was stunned. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a ruling. No one had visited his garage. No one had asked how many packages he shipped. They were just flexing power, refusing to back down. Jim requested a formal appeal. The HOA scheduled a special meeting 2 weeks later. He prepared a binder full of receipts, photos, and evidence showing his sales volume was modest. He even included letters from buyers praising the memorabilia, but nothing could prepare him for what happened next. The special meeting took place in the Willow Bend community room. About 20 residents showed up, mostly retirees like Jim. The HOA board, Richard Fletcher, Karen Thompson, and 3 others sat at a long folding table. Karen stood up with a projector remote in hand. She'd created a PowerPoint presentation titled Garage-Based Commercial Threats. She showed pictures of Jim's driveway, screenshots from Craigslist and eBay, and even a blurry photo of Jim carrying a package to his car. This kind of activity, she said, her voice tinged with faux concern, not only violates our bylaws, but also endangers property values and invites liability. Jim tried to argue, calmly pointing out that he shipped fewer than 5 packages a week, had 0 customer traffic, and never disturbed anyone. But the board wasn't listening. They nodded solemnly at Karen's every word. When the vote came, the decision was 5-2 in favor of upholding the violation. Jim felt the floor drop beneath him. It wasn't just the unfair ruling, it was the smug look Karen gave him, as if she'd just conquered a kingdom. Word of the meeting spread quickly. Karen made sure of it. She began telling neighbors that Jim was running a commercial operation and refused to cooperate with the HOA. Some neighbors, like friendly Ted and Diana across the street, supported Jim. They'd bought a few trinkets from him and thought the whole thing was ridiculous. But others grew cold. He noticed the difference in small ways. Conversations at the mailbox stopped. Long greetings were replaced with stiff nods. Even the mailman avoided lingering too long dots. Jim began to feel like a pariah in the very place. He had come for peace. Something had to change. Jim knew the next HOA board meeting would be public. This time, he didn't just come with paperwork. He came prepared to record every word. Karen was already in her element when he arrived. "We're here today to reinforce the importance of upholding our bylaws," she said to the audience. "One homeowner's refusal to follow rules threatens everyone." She didn't name Jim, but all eyes turned toward him. Jim stood and calmly played a short video clip from his garage tour showing organized shelves, labeled boxes, and a stack of 5 outgoing packages. "This is not a business," he said. "This is a personal hobby, but I've been painted as a menace." He passed out flyers quoting actual bylaws, proving that his volume didn't violate anything substantial. Still, the board held firm. Again, the vote stood 5-2 in favor of keeping the violation. Jim nodded. "Thank you," he said calmly. "Then I suppose I'll begin removing the items immediately." The board looked satisfied, but they didn't know what was coming that night. Jim stayed up until 3 a.m., photographing everything in the garage: tools, clocks, posters, even the old microwave. He listed every single item as free pickup on Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and a few collector forums. But he didn't stop there. He created a public Facebook event titled HOA Mandated Willow Pinned Garage Giveaway. All items must go. He used HOA-style language to make it look official, greater than in compliance with recent HOA directives. Resident James Reynolds is required to vacate commercial materials from his garage. Join us for a one-time HOA-supported garage clean-out. Saturday, from 9 a.m. 3 p.m., everything must go. Hundreds of SVP DJIM sat back in his recliner sipping tea, watching the numbers rise. Saturday arrived. By 8:30 a.m., cars were already parking up and down Willow Bend Lane. By 9 o'clock, the street was swarmed with people from all over the county. Some came for free tools, some for collectible knickknacks, and some just out of curiosity. The yard buzzed with voices, laughter, and the sound of boxes being carried out. Jim wore a Hawaiian shirt and a sun hat. He greeted everyone with cheer and offered coffee. Karen came storming down the sidewalk by 9:15, her phone in one hand and fury in her eyes. "What is this?" she hissed. Jim handed her a flyer. "Just doing what the HOA ordered. Clearing out my garage. All items must go." "You made it look like it's HOA endorsed," she snapped. "I never said that, but I assumed it would help encourage compliance." She threatened to call the police. "Please do," Jim said. "I'd love to explain it to them." By 10:30, a local news van arrived. A reporter stepped out and started interviewing people. Someone had tipped them off that a local HOA was forcing a retiree to give away his personal belongings. Jim stood on his driveway smiling beside a cardboard sign. "Thank you, HOA." Karen tried to stop the filming but was brushed off. Attempts to argue with Jim were caught on live camera. She looked erratic. Jim looked reasonable by noon. Clips were already circulating on Twitter and Facebook. The headline read, Retired engineer forced to empty garage by HOA turns it into public giveaway. The crowd grew so large that cars began blocking driveways. One neighbor called the police not on Jim, but on the traffic. When officers arrived, they were calm. They asked Jim if he was selling anything. Nope, he said, everything's free. One officer laughed. Smart move. Karen watched from across the street, seething, surrounded by neighbors asking questions she couldn't answer. Meanwhile, more people arrived, including a group of vintage radio enthusiasts who took photos with Jim like he was a local legend. HOA board panicked. Richard sent an emergency message calling for a special meeting, but it was too late. Jim had won the court of public opinion, and the HOA's image was crumbling fast.